So my name is Olександр Данилюк. I'm the chairman of Ukrainian Center for Defense Reforms, which is independent think tank and one of our major, let's say, area of interest is the detection of Russian hybrid activities, not just in Ukraine, but globally. Because of that, we actually had some cases of Russian interference in Ukrainian elections collected together. And before we start our panel discussion, I would love to make this sort of historical introduction into this issue and to provide you some examples of this interference. But before that, I want you to watch two political advertisements. We will discuss them later. So this is political advertisement of Natalia Vitrenko. We had such a, and still have such a nice politician. She was, and I believe still is, one of the most pro-Russian politicians. And in 2006, she took part in the legislative elections we had that time. And according to our understanding of that processes, she was used for not winning that elections, but for, let's say, spreading some narratives and messages. You can see in this particular first and second advertisement. So according to our vision, she was used by Russians to increase linguistic, ethnical, and religious tensions between pro-Russian and pro-Western part of the population. And you will definitely see this, I believe, even without translation in these two examples of her advertisement. Taras, please.
Защитим православие.
Блок Натальи Витренко, народная оппозиция.
So the slogan is to protect Orthodox Church. So we can see a lot of different. Sorry. So in this advertisement, we can see also attack on not just other confessions, but also let's say attempt to describe any other confessions as a representatives of some sort of Western impact on the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. And we can see, let's say, absolutely unacceptable using of this black priest, definitely to, let's say, inspire not just, let's say, religious, but also racial tension. So unfortunately, it was on TV. As far as I remember, it was banned after, let's say, months of broadcasting. But the second one, which actually the example of how Vitrenko was used to inspire these linguistic tensions between Russian-speaking part of Ukraine and Ukrainian-speaking. So you will see the girl, schoolgirl in this advertisement, and her conflict with teacher who will not give her right to leave the classroom to go to toilet because this girl doesn't speak Ukrainian. So you will see that, please.
Марічка.
Мне нужно выйти.
Ні. Кажи державною мовою.
Русский язык – второй государственный.
Блок Натальи Витренко, народная оппозиция.
Okay, so you can see this confrontation between Ukrainian-speaking teacher and Russian-speaking girl. Okay, it was just short entertainment before we start our presentation. So, okay, technically, of course, Russia had engagement into Ukrainian elections since 1991, but we decided to start from Gangadze Gate, which is not maybe we probably can't call it engagement into elections, but it was, I would say, one of the best Russian hybrid operations in Ukraine, and it changed totally political landscape for decade in Ukraine. So actually in 2004, in 1999, Kuchma was re-elected, and just after that he changed totally his let's say vision and his strategy for Ukraine. He built, first time in our history, pro-Western majority without communists. He built this majority with National Democrats. He appointed Viktor Yushchenko as a prime minister. We had at that time very pro-Western government. Yulia Tymoshenko was a vice prime minister in that government. A lot of prominent Ukrainian pro-Ukrainian politicians from National Democratic camp became ministers. So it looked very different from, let's say, Ukrainian governments in the 90s. Unfortunately for this pro-Western course, as you remember, in September of 2000, Ukrainian journalist Georgy Gangadze disappeared, and campaign for and let's say a group of politicians and civil activists and journalists claimed and accused Kuchma to be responsible for not just kidnapping but also assassination of Georgy Gangadze. It was pretty, let's say, it looked very credible. A huge part of Ukrainian population believed that, and actually the consequences of the protests, so-called Ukraine without Kuchma political protest, consequences were pretty bad for Ukrainian pro-Western course, because actually as a result of this political scandal, Ukraine lost or Kuchma, and as a result Ukraine lost a lot of credibility in the eyes of the foreign partners. It was almost political isolation, which forced Kuchma to look for closer ties with Russian Federation again. Of course, for National Democrats it was not possible to stay in the majority. They left the majority, so the government, this pro-Western government, was dismissed, and Kuchma was forced to build new majority with communists and other pro-Russian forces again. And as a, let's say, final point of these consequences, Viktor Medvedchuk, the most notorious pro-Russian politician, was appointed as the head of the presidential administration and became technically co-ruler of the country. So Viktor Medvedchuk is really the most pro-Russian among Ukrainian politicians, and he has pretty close personal ties with both President and Prime Minister of the Russian Federation, Putin and Medvedev. They are godfathers of his kids. So it's like he's sort of relative to them. Yeah, and so why we believe that this story is one of the examples of the political warfare operations conducted by Russians against Ukraine. So there are a lot of facts about the person of the whistleblower, Major Melnichenko, who actually taped conversations in the office of the President Kuchma, and all of this scandal was based actually on that tapes. So it's not, unfortunately at that time it was not very well known, but Major Melnichenko used to serve in the Russian secret services until 1994. By the way, he was a pretty good personal friend of Alexander Litvinenko, FSB officer poisoned in London. They were classmates in the high school of KGB in 80s. Actually, they started a friendship war there. During all of this scandal, Major Melnichenko spent a lot of time in London in apartments of Litvinenko, and a few months before his death, Alexander Litvinenko claimed that Mykola Melnichenko had regular contacts with FSB, and we can see that actually in this period he often were in Moscow and even didn't try to hide that, and even called the handler, the name of the handler of Major Melnichenko, it's General Pavlovsky, General of FSB. Again, so we have Major Melnichenko who had that ties, and we had that consequences. So we believe that it's important to start. I mean, it's important to remind you this story and explain you some aspects which, unfortunately, are not very well known. There is another fact which is also suspicious, because despite of the let's say, public image of Georgy Gangadze at that time, one of his previous jobs before his disappearance was, so he was a political advisor to Natalia Vitrenko, so which was pretty strange, because actually Georgy Gangadze was born in Lviv and had like very nationalistic views in his family on both sides, on his Georgian side and on his Ukrainian side. At the same time, it's very interesting that his mother never believed in this plot, and even just 6 months before her death, it was probably 5 years ago, she made several public statements about all of this story with just a provocation, and she never believed that Kuchma was actually behind of this assassination. So let's say the mother of Gangadze was more or less, so she believed probably more or less in the same version of this story we provided you. Okay, so 2004 presidential elections were great example of how Russia can manipulate public opinion in Ukraine and build political landscape favorable for their geopolitical goals. So, of course, we can see that actually in 2004 Russia had the plan to divide our country, and we will explain why. So on the left side you see also political advertisement used by pro-Russian candidate Yanukovych at that time. So this is a so-called free source of Ukrainians. So they at that time released literally tens of millions of pieces of these posters, and this is very famous poster, and this is clear message to Ukrainians about 3 different Ukraines, and we can compare with map to more current maps of Russian let's say, vision of how Ukraine should be divided into 3 parts. So we can see it's more or less the same map. So we can see this yellow part of the left map, and it looks exactly like so-called Nova Russia, which is actually, which was a strategic goal of the so-called Russian Spring operation started since annexation of Crimea, and after that in Donbass and other regions. At that time, it's also important to to remind that the main narrative against Yushchenko for pro-Russian voters that he is Nazi and he is American puppet. So it was like, again, messages used in black advertisement used by pro-Russian camp, and you can see that they used even real billboards in Donetsk and pictured Yushchenko as a Nazi officer, so they could do that. As well as you can see Yushchenko as Uncle Sam. So, and on the poster you can read that Bosnia, Herzegovina, Serbia, Kosovo, Iraq, you are next. So one of the messages they use. So this is not very unusual. What was, I would say, interesting and not typical for Western countries, it was creation of the literally fake reality, because you can see on this picture young guys with Nazi symbols who pretended to be far-right supporters of Yushchenko at that time in 2004. At that time we didn't have, let's say, any numerous enough far-right groups or organizations, so that's why Russians decided that it would be useful enough just to develop them by themselves. So these young guys are cadets of police academy, Ukrainian police academy. So they were ordered by their commanders to use this Nazi-style bombers and that flags to pretend that they are literally unexisted far-right organization supported Yushchenko. Also at that time, on the local television and radio and in local media in Donbass, started a serious, huge-scale information psychological operation to build so-called Donbass sub-ethnical identity. So it was a huge campaign focused on the promotion of this regionalism and feeling that Donbass people are not Ukrainian people, but something different. Yeah. Fake news. Very interesting, and by the way, Russia using it even right now. It's pretty clear that people usually believe to the TV stations, to the television, and it's very easy just to translate Ukrainian words into Russian with some, crucial changes to change totally the real meaning of that statement. It was used on the huge scale in 2004, and a part of Ukrainian population, especially that part who used to watch Russian-speaking news. So they believed that, for instance, Tymoshenko said that she wanted to put Donbass on its knees, and actually it was just a piece of her statement about minors, and she said that actually minors are very important for Ukraine, and Ukrainians have to put on their knees to respect these people and their job. So it was just cut, translate, and they achieved absolutely opposite result. More or less the same stuff with other messages. And again, it was very easy to do because part of Ukrainian voters watched Ukrainian-speaking news, and another part watched Russian-speaking news. So from this point of view, it was possible just to build two different realities for these two groups. And again, why we mentioned 2004 as the first attempt to divide the country. During the Orange Revolution, just in the first days, we can see that more or less the same processes as we saw in 2014 started. For instance, Lugansk Regional Council approved the decision on the establishment of autonomous Southeast Ukrainian Republic, that Nova-Russia part. Odessa adopted a resolution demanding recognition of Odessa and the whole Odessa region as a self-governing territory, and they even used this Nova-Russia region definition in that statement. Kharkiv Regional Council also decided to concentrate all powers in the hands of that time Governor Evgeny Kushnarev, and the final gathering of all of the pro-Russian politicians in Severodonetsk, together with Russian politicians, was also very clear indicator that supported by Russia, part of Ukrainian political establishment was ready to start secession of the country. They actually started that process. Hopefully, they didn't finish it, but nonetheless, such an attempt was made. So 2006, and we already seen this advertisement of Natalia Vitrenko. So as we said, the campaign was aimed at fueling linguistic, religious, and historical contradictions between different groups of Ukrainian voters. And it's also important to notice that the campaign was financed by Russian criminal group close to Vice Speaker of Russian Duma, Mr. Babakov, who is on the short list of US sanctions for annexation of Crimea. And on this picture, you can see one of these representatives of this criminal group. It's Maxim Kurachkin, so-called Max Beshenny, who actually was arrested by Ukrainian law enforcement agencies in 2005 and killed by unknown assassin on the stairs of the court. So to understand the importance of Vitrenko, we also can see that picture with Mr. Dugin, famous Russian ultra-nationalist and political technologist working closely with the Kremlin. And so in 2014, SBU arrested 82 million rubles Vitrenko got from Mr. Lavrov's organization and claimed that that money were sent to Vitrenko to be used for this Russian Spring operation to support different anti-Ukrainian and anti-government riots in the different eastern and southern regions of Ukraine. It's very interesting to also remind you the beginning of the political career of Mr. Kaskev, Vladislav Kaskev, who actually was one of the leaders of Ukrainian Orange Revolution. He was one of the leaders of young youth revolutionary movement Pora, Ukrainian version of more or less same revolutionary youth movements in Serbia and Georgia. In 2005, he founded the political party with the same name, and this political party, just a few months before the legislative elections of 2006, started their own national campaign against pro-Western politicians. So they claimed all of these pro-Western politicians, including Yushchenko and Tymoshenko, to be betrayers of the Orange Revolution, and as a result of this campaign, of course, the popularity of these political parties decreased, and as we remember, in 2006, pro-Russian forces created coalition in the parliament. By the way, they created that coalition with, to be honest, one of the participants of the Orange Revolution, Alexander Moroz, who at that time was the head of Socialist Party of Ukraine. Nobody among his voters expected him to build this pro-Russian coalition, because his voters were usually Ukrainian villagers, mostly Ukrainian-speaking, anti-Russian voters. So he built this coalition, and it's very interesting to mention also that Mr. Moroz was one of the key persons in the Gangadze Gate, together with Major Milichenko. He was actually one of the key speakers since the very beginning of the scandal. In 2006, another members of PRA, like Andriy Yusov, Evgeny Zolotaryov, other leaders of this political party, started accusing Kaskev to be a secret collaborator with pro-Russian forces. At that time, it sounded crazy, but as we know, in 2010, Kaskev joined pro-Russian government, became the head of the National Investment Agency, and right now is under criminal investigation because of stealing like billions of Ukrainian state funds. Unfortunately, we don't have any solid evidence about any Russian engagement into assassination of Mr. Evgeny Kushnarev, who was one of the alternative leaders of pro-Russian Party of Regions. But as Konstantin Zatulin, famous Russian politician, said, that assassination was very useful and on time for Mr. Yanukovych, because at that time it was 2007. Most of the members of the Party of Regions wanted to find somebody less toxic, more moderate, and Evgeny Kushnarev was such a person. So he was assassinated during the hunting, and what we can say definitely that it opened the door for Mr. Yanukovych for his presidential campaign and as a single leader of the all united Russian forces. And it was a very clear signal to all of other potential alternative leaders that it's probably better not to compete with Mr. Yanukovych. Okay, so 2009. There are a lot of speculations about falsifications in 2010 and how Mr. Yanukovych was elected as the president of Ukraine. We believe that actually the main reason why Tymoshenko lost that elections was this pedophile gate, pedophile scandal, which was 100% fake, but at the same time it was performed in such amazing, if we can call it so, a way that, again, a significant part of pro-Western voters believed that it was true. So it was a scandal with several members of parliament who belonged to Tymoshenko's party. Mr. Ukolov, who was at that time the main PR advisor to Tymoshenko. Right now he works for the presidential administration in the same role. Sergei Terehkin, who was actually one of the leaders of the faction at that time, responsible for economical issues, and Mr. Bogdan, who actually had some, and still, I believe, has some sort of gas business and was one of the main sponsors of the political party. So all of the people were accused in multiple rape of kids of this man on the picture, Mr. Polyukhovich. In less than 1 year after the victory of Mr. Yanukovych, the criminal case was closed. Polyukhovich was released from the prison because actually these facts, I mean this rape, never actually took place. So it was totally 100% fake, but as I said, very well performed, and it costed Tymoshenko a significant part of potential support. And it's very interesting to see who were behind of this particular scandal. So the person who started this investigation was Vadim Kolesnichenko, notorious pro-Russian politician. who has right now Russian citizenship and who is technically since 2014 not Ukrainian but Russian politician. So he's one of the members of Russian political party Rodina. This is political party of Mr. Rogozin, Vice Prime Minister of Russian Federation. Another person, Artyom Degtyaryov, who actually was at that time lover of the mother of these kids, so Miss Polyukhovich. So Artyom Degtyaryov was also Russian citizen, Russian journalist, and Russian civil activist. Tatiana Montyan, who was sort of public attorney for participation in different type of TV shows to accuse representatives of Tymoshenko's party. So since 2014, she openly supported Russia and their proxies in Crimea and Donbass. On the picture, you can see Tatiana Montyan with pro-Russian terrorists in Lugansk. And she has a lot of such pictures. So since 2014, or even since Maidan, actually, since the beginning of Maidan revolution, she totally changed her public positioning and started anti-Ukrainian rhetorics, we can say so. It's also interesting to mention that Tatiana Montyan was also a very active participant of Gangadze Gate, and her husband, Judge Vasilenko, actually was the judge who opened the criminal case against President Kuchma at that time. Another attorney, Andrei Tsigankov, a very interesting guy. He was also a lawyer for Semyon Mogilevich in 2005. So Semyon Mogilevich is so-called boss of the bosses, like head of all of the Russian international criminal organizations, pretty close to Russian special agencies, particularly FSB, and to Kremlin, who was also engaged in RosukrEnergo issue, that notorious Russian-Ukrainian gas corruption, signed in 2005. So right now it's also interesting. Andrei Tsigankov is a lawyer for Mr. Onishchenko, who, by the way, also taped another president, President Poroshenko, using his iWatch. And it's also important to say that it's not clear for us, but all of this fake information was released by Ukrainska Pravda. So since the very beginning, all of the facts were, so like Ukrainska Pravda was the main media outlet used by these people for distribution of all of this information. And unfortunately, we have to notice also that personally, that time journalists of Ukrainska Pravda, Mustafa Naim and Sergei Lещенко, they made their own investigation based on these facts. And of course, for pro-Western voters, Ukrainska Pravda looked as a credible source of information. That's why without this support, it's difficult to say how it could be legalized for the public. So yeah, Yanukovych won the elections, and it's also interesting to remind you that one of the first laws the parliament, who at that time already had pro-Russian majority, passed was the law on referendum, which was issued only to cover two types of referendum, so change of constitutional orders and secession. So we believe that actually it was the first step to start federalization of the country, and actually this partition we mentioned in previous slides. We also saw attempts to inspire Western Ukrainian separatism. Unfortunately, we still can see some examples of that. For instance, structures close to Viktor Medvedchuk. In 2014 even, they were pretty active in Galiciana, in Lviv, in some other cities, and promoting these ideas of this, let's say, sub-ethnical identity of Western Ukrainians. Yeah, and of course, Українські вибори, which was the organization of Mr. Medvedchuk, it was pretty active in the promotion of federalization of Ukraine as a the best possible solution for Ukrainians to live together. Yeah. And some pro-Russian parties like Rodina, Motherland, and Communist Party of Ukraine, and Progressive Socialist Party of Ukraine of Vitrenko also supported this conception. So this is short historical introduction, and Molly, let's start from you. So what would you love to add?
Sure. I would maybe just highlight a couple of things, not being a Ukraine expert to the extent that you are. I think that there's themes that we see over time, including the manipulation of identity in particular, that I think is really interesting, but sort of pulling at the different threads of language and religion and history in ways that I think Russia and other actors know very well how to manipulate people and provoke an emotional response. And they sort of rely on these emotional responses in very specific ways. We've seen that elsewhere in the region as well. I've worked in Georgia, Moldova, and the Baltic states, and it's interesting how much there is commonality in topic and theme in terms of different provocations, especially these ideas of pedophilia and rape. They're such easy topics to get an emotional response from people on. They are constantly used in political accusations that may or may not be so true ultimately. And I think that the other piece that's important to pay attention to is, and we've seen it certainly in more concrete and condensed versions in places like Moldova, and in sort of longer versions in places like Georgia, but the discrediting of pro-Western forces, primarily from within, is a really interesting cycle that I think we need to pay more attention to in terms of how this is being done, the importance of creating this zero-sum seeming landscape between the Western choice and a more pro-Russian choice, which is done not ever by promoting a pro-Russian anything. It's always done by discrediting pro-European and pro-Western forces from inside their own coalitions. And that is a pattern we've seen, certainly in Moldova, definitely in Georgia, in milder versions in the Baltic states as well. So I think that is a topic that's worthy of further discussion. I think that's it to start.
Ну, я українською буду, мені набагато легше так. Дійсно, вплив Російської Федерації на вибори в Україні був доволі добре показаний. Дуже дякую за це. Історичний екскурс про те, яким чином фактично в Україні створювалися ці розколи, формувалися квазі-ідентичності. Я лише одну замальовку стосовно того, наскільки це відповідає дійсності, дам по сходу України. Один, наприклад, з моментів – це чітко було показано, як 2004 рік фактично було створено пік так званих сепаратистських рухів на Сході для формування донбаської ідентичності. Логічно було б припустити, що якщо з 2002 по 2004 рік було влито велика кількість грошей в формування такої ідентичності.
I'm sorry, do you need a translation? Yeah? Yeah, okay. So I will try to do Oleg agrees that, and by the way, Oleg is from Donetsk, and he was one of the leaders of pro-Ukrainian movement in 2014. So he agrees that 2004 was the starting point of the creation of this pro-Russian separatism in Donbass.
Separatist identity.
And that's why it was so important to underline and emphasize this building of this fake quasi-identity, quasi-ethnical identity, because before that nobody in Donbass had anything like that, so they believed to be just like Ukrainians.
Логічно було б припустити, що, мабуть, після цього має принаймні електорально вималюватися певний сепаратистський рух. Я вже не кажу про акції культурні тощо по формуванню його. Так от, з 2004 року по початок російсько-української війни сепаратистські партії, в яких було з півдесятка, не провели свого депутата жодного ні в центральний парламент, не в обласний, не в місцевий і навіть до жодної районної ради.
Yeah, it's very important to mention that despite of this campaign, which Russia started in 2004, and despite of using like maybe 5 or 6 different marginal political parties with separatist agenda, these political parties, they were not very popular, so they didn't have any elected MPs, not just on the national level, but even on the local level. So they didn't have that support.
Тобто за 10 років при вливанні коштів, при наявності оргресурсу, при наявності абсолютно тепличних інкубаторних умов на сході України все одно не вдалося ані знайти прихильників цієї ідеології з одного боку, ані знайти авторитетних людей, які б користувалися підтримкою своїх громад, для того, щоб вони під цими прапорами пішли на вибори.
So it means that despite of the financial, media and political support, enormous support these separatist movements and parties had from Russia, they didn't achieve any success in not just finding like people's support, like voters' support, but also they failed to find any leaders of local opinion who would love to join this conception, this agenda, and start promoting it.
Стосовно беззаперечної підтримки лише однієї політичної сили на Сході, на той момент це партія регіонів, так само є цікава ілюстрація у вигляді електоральних мап, де ми бачимо, що результати виборів майже по всім виборчим дільницям були однаковими, з різницею в 1-2%. Тобто підтримка була від 67 до 70%.
So it's also worthwhile to mention that it was like monopoly of the Party of Regions, which was the single pro-Russian party, or just the single party in the region which was popular. And it's very interesting that on all of the districts this popularity, this support was more or less equal, because actually the difference was just 1-2% and was about 65-70%, something like that.
І якось я, коли готував одну з лекцій, задався питанням, як можна показати, що ці цифри є фейковими, фактично маніпулятивними і малювалися з колінки.
So once then I was preparing one of my lectures, I decided to explain and to find how to explain that all of that popularity actually was not real, was not based on real people's support, and was a result of manipulations and electoral fraud.
Можливо, я не знав, і дійсно є якийсь феномен цієї монолітності і того, що у всіх ділянках підтримка майже як під копірку, така сама, як на сусідніх.
Yeah, maybe I didn't know some secret, some magic, because of which all of this popularity was equal in all of the districts and looked like, you know, just a monopoly.
Я вирішив піти від зворотнього і підняв етнічні, культурні, політичні мапи Сходу України. І якщо ми подивимось, то з точки зору укладу є приморські території, Маріуполь, Бердянськ тощо. Є сільськогосподарські землі, це Волноваха, Центральна Донеччина. Є металургійні міста, Краматорськ, наприклад.
Yeah, and I decided to check these results, these electoral results of the Party of Regions with ethnical, cultural, and other social maps of the region. And I saw that there are several different parts of Donbass. For instance, so-called Priazovia, so the territory from Mariupol along the Sea of Azov coast. There is rural areas like Volnovakha, which actually agricultural, and there are like still industry cities like Kramatorsk, etc.
Також міста, які орієнтовані на вугільну промисловість.
Also, some cities focus on mining.
І північ, яка є суто рекреаційною зоною, наприклад, Святогір'я.
And recreational part of the region on the north, like Святогір'я, for instance.
Також є громади, які складаються з переваженою більшості з етнічних спільнот, наприклад, грецьких або татарських.
Also, there are some like territories with ethnical minorities. For instance, Greeks near Mariupol and
Tatars в центрі.
And Tatars in the center of the region.
Також є місця переселення до цього українців або росіян на цій території в 20 сторіччі.
There are also ethnical concentration of Russian villagers or Ukrainian villagers who were deported there during Soviet or Russian Empire period.
Так от я не міг довести через цифри маніпуляції на виборах, але я чітко можу стверджувати, що немає жодного іншого регіону в Європі, де би приморська, аграрна, індустріальна, рекреаційна зона, представники різних етнічних груп голосували абсолютно однаково.
Yeah, and that is my point, because you know, it's just there is no other region in Europe who could be the same phenomena, because we had the same popularity of party of regions in all of these different ethnical, industrial, cultural zones, which is unusual and impossible.
Відповідно, це говорить про те, що цифри, які ми бачили як результат виборів, були вкрай маніпулятивними.
So my point is that popularity was very manipulative.
Я можу ще інший приклад наводити, але зараз не буду. Зрештою, до чого я це говорю? До того, що можемо подивитися через результати так званих сепаратистських партій, можемо подивитися через удавану монолітність регіону, але жодного реального сепаратистського руху на початок російської війни так і не вдалося створити.
Yeah, we can compare different ethnical regions, cultural regions, but my point is that despite of all of the attempts, even in the very beginning of the Russian-Ukrainian war, Russia failed to build any real separatist movement in Donbass.
В довгостроковій перспективі фейкові моделі впливу на інформаційний простір не створюють дійсності, але вони можуть підмінити реальність. І я певен, що і на цих виборах Російська Федерація знову буде апелювати до всіх тих розколів, на які вона працювала впродовж вже майже 20 років. І ми знову почуємо про локальні якісь відмінні ідентичності, про релігійні відмінності і спільноти, ми знову почуємо про захист якихось меншин.
Yeah, and actually, of course, in the long-term perspective, using these fakes, it's not possible to build the new reality, but it's possible to at least replace this reality by this fake image. And I believe that during this campaign we will have next year, Russia will use again this fake ethnical, religious, and others contradictions between different Ukrainian regions and groups, and will promote also this quasi-identity in different regions, at least in the media.
Тому нам важливо дивитися на ситуацію реально і розуміти, де цей ґрунт, який відображає дійсність, реальність, для того, щоб не піддаватися на маніпуляції.
So that's why it's so important to understand there is a reality and what is real, what is not, and this is the single possible way to not to be manipulated by Russians. Okay, so I think that we can start sort of forecasting and trying to understand what patterns from the history of Russian hybrid engagement into Ukrainian political processes could be used next year. But before that, maybe anybody has some questions? Any questions? No, okay, great. So again, according to my view, I think that it was very useful historical review, because we had a lot of less and more fake scandals based on different aspects. And by the way, it's pretty clear that, for instance, pedophile gate was such a strong, well-built, developed narrative, had such a well-built narrative that, of course, it caused a sort of mass hysteria, because it's pretty clear that it's definitely out of any sort of acceptance. So it's totally unacceptable for any people in Ukraine. So I think that next year we will see a lot of different, political, sexual, economical scandals, and as we saw on the example of Mr. Kaskev, it's not possible to say that these scandals will be, built just by using pro-Russian actors, because it's pretty clear that that audience of these operations is not pro-Russian voters. So the audience of these operations always pro-Ukrainian voters, and even that story with pedophile gate, despite Vadim Kolesnichenko, that pro-Russian MP, started that campaign, very soon, just in a few days after that, another member of parliament, Grigory Amelchenko, who was actually the member of pro-Western party, he started his personal, crusade based on these facts, and actually Vadim Kolesnichenko was not very actively used during all of that media coverage of that fake story. So most of the people, like Tatiana Mantan, for instance, at that time they looked very pro-Western, and nobody expected that she became this, Russian lover in 2014. So it was a huge surprise. By the way, she was pretty popular as a local politician. Even she had chance to bring to win local elections in Kyiv City Council before that, and that's why I think what is important for Ukrainian voters and also for our foreign partners, it's just to be aware that a lot of these stories could be well developed, well prepared, and it's very often not enough just to check, like to check basic facts, because it's like that story with Gangadze disappearance, because very soon the body which was decapitated was found, but at the same time still there are a lot of speculations about DNA analysis of this body, and the mother of Gangadze didn't believe, until her death, that actually that body belonged to her son. Yeah, so I mean that sometimes it could be total fake, like in story with raped kids, because that kid's never been raped. Sometimes it could be at least somebody was killed, right? So the body was found, so somebody was killed in this story. And by the way, it was also interesting to see how after assassination of Pavel Sheremet, we saw more or less the same attempts to use this terrorist act as a starting point of the something very, very similar to that Ukraine Without Kuchma campaign. Of course, it was pretty difficult to do because Pavel was not very, he was actually a Russian journalist, he was not very engaged into Ukrainian political processes, he was not really in sort of opposition, and he worked for actually Radio Vesti, which actually belonged to the representatives of the previous regime. But nonetheless, I think, unfortunately, that the price of the potential revenge for Russia is so high in the next year that we have to be prepared for any sort of provocation. So we can see that almost each month we have terrorist attacks on activists, assassinations of Ukrainian military personnel, like it was with Maxim Shapoval, who was assassinated 1 year ago. So it means that, unfortunately for us, Russia has these tools on the ground, so they can use them, and they definitely can use them to manipulate the public opinion and the attitude towards Ukraine from the West. Molly, would you like to add anything?
It's interesting what you're discussing about conspiracy. I just wrote a long piece for Wired magazine on some of the conspiracies that have been used to sort of harden and activate specific political groupings in the United States over the last 4 or 5 years. And I think that the interesting part is sort of the similarity of actors and themes over time, that you sort of create these narratives and use them to create an incident, and then you can kind of put them away but bring them back, and people know the themes and they sort of hit the right buttons again. And it's a tool that I think we're all aware is used, but I don't think we have a good response to it, and that's really the problem. Is, as we have seen in the last 4 years or so, especially since Crimea, when there's been more attention to what do you do about disinformation or fake news or whatever you want to call it, the bottom line is people believe what they see first. And you can put, no, this isn't real, here is the truth, this is what it looks like in front of them, and they still believe whatever it was that they saw first. So this is a really difficult challenge, and I think part of this is showing the history of the way that these themes have been used. I think in particular, younger voters don't know the history of a lot of these things. In the US, that is certainly the case. And certainly for the international community looking in at Ukraine, Ukraine is a very complicated political landscape for anybody to look at. And everybody you talk to in Ukraine will have something to say about everybody else, that none of it is ever very good. And I think the part that we all have the hardest time with is the way that the same people go through these iterations of pro-Western, pro-Russian, pro-Western, pro-Russian, but just sort of change hats and move on. You know, it's the same actors over time. And we have a hard, if you're from outside, it's hard to figure out who everybody is, what their history is, where they came from, and what they're doing now. So I think the more that you can do to help give clarity to that for people looking from outside, that helps a lot. But I think we all need to think more about how we respond to the use of conspiracy as a political tool, because it's a really effective way to manipulate voters.
Correct. Thank you, Molly. And by the way, I think that you know, it's important to mention that usually, you know, Russia has a lot of tools, of course, and agents of influence and useful idiots on the ground, but not like, you know, it's still, you know, countable. So it means that if we would look into, you know, into the list of participants of all of that provocations, very often we will see again and again the same people, you know, like it was with Montan, like it was with Vadim Kolesnichenko. By the way, it's also important to mention that Vadim Kolesnichenko was responsible for the operation against Ukrainian-Polish relations. So he started actually this campaign based on that petty Ukrainian-Polish, you know, ethnical cleansings, right? Cleansings, yeah, we had during Second World War, and a lot of people who were used by him since actually April of 2010. A lot of that people were from other countries, including Israel, but all of them were used by others, for other hybrid operations. For instance, one of the guys who took part in first press conference focused on that, you know, Ukrainian responsibility for that Volyn massacre. He actually was Israeli citizen, but in Israel he was known as a ultra-nationalist, responsible for several attempts to inspire, you know, a sort of Islamic revolt in Jerusalem and other things. So it means that we definitely can collect this information. We can share that with our partners, including actually Poland. But sometimes it's too late, because right now it's not important who started that process, because unfortunately there is a huge part of the Polish population who actually accepted that narrative, and they you know, they follow this, and this is actually a conception of this reflexive control, which is in the bottom of the Soviet and Russian, you know, special warfare, hybrid warfare, you know, active measures, all of this. So I believe that. Would you love to add anything? No.
Я лише дам, що це якраз яскрава ілюстрація того у Польщі, що інформаційна війна не виграється тільки в інформаційній площині. Вона починається з культурного і світоглядного рівня, які фактично формують той наративний ряд, фактично створюючи призму сприйняття себе у реальності і реальності навколо себе. Тобто це не тільки інформаційні кампанії по дезінформації, які є самодостатніми, а кампанії по дезінформації, вони є ключами, які активують вже наявний наративний або стереотипний ланцюжок, за допомогою якого людина потім має для себе скласти картинку, яка потрібна тримачу цієї рамки, цього порядку денного, себто агресору.
So academical, I am not sure I can translate it properly, but I will try. So the idea is that, so it's if we have deal with Russian hybrid warfare, it's not just about misinformation, but about shaping of the public opinion in the way which could inspire something which already exists in the society, like cultural stereotypes, you know, some sort of old wounds, and this is much more important. So to encourage people to behave in some way using something they already believed, so this is the key point.
І друга теза, яку хотів сказати в цьому поприщі, що потрібно бути свідомими, тому що сучасна пропаганда набагато швидше адаптувалася до епохи постмодерну, ніж держави. І тому потрібно розуміти, що якщо пропаганда 20-го сторіччя вона була направлена на те, щоб когось переконати, і вона боялася альтернативної думки, то сьогоднішня дезінформаційна війна, пропаганда, вона навпаки використовує сумнів і навпаки направлена на те, щоб формувати ці сумніви, а не переконати в чомусь.
Yeah, and second, actually, it's important to say that you know, modern propaganda changed itself and became like more postmodern than, you know, governments, and that's why like it's too academical. Sorry.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah, it would be better if you would use like simpler constructions, please.
Okay, если старая пропаганда.
Okay, old propaganda was more focused on the fighting for monopoly, and they or it looked for opportunity to dominate in the restricted area, and that propaganda was against any doubts. But today, modern propaganda is all about how to see these doubts in this society and how to promote these doubts. So it's not about fighting for monopoly on the truth. It's about how to undermine the credibility of any reality.
Якщо раніше, коли з'явилася альтернативна думка, пропаганда намагалася її вивести за скобки, її ізолювати або навіть знищити, то зараз, як тільки з'являється альтернативна думка, представники пропаганди ці кажуть, а давайте подискутуємо, йдіть до нас.
So if in the mid of, or in the beginning of development of modern propaganda, it was against any alternative opinions, so right now it's opposite. So the modern propaganda is looking for as many alternative opinions as possible and promote public discussion as a tool of actually undermining of any reality.
Саме тому передвиборчий період – це найбільш уразливий період для демократичних держав, оскільки сучасна інформаційна війна вже адаптована до цього періоду і отримує сприятливі умови для того, щоб розгортатися і маніпулювати демократичними процедурами. А держави, навпаки, ще реагують на неї в старих формах і фактично самі стають заручниками, вже випереджаючи їх технології.
Yeah, and it's clear that this, you know, pre-election period is the best time for this modern propaganda, and this is the time of the highest vulnerability of any modern democracy, and modern propaganda adopted to this period has all of the tools, modern tools. It needs to be successful, but unfortunately governments still using like old techniques, and that's why they're not able to protect themselves and democracy and democratic institutions properly. Okay, thank you. Any questions? No? Thank you very much for your attention, and have a nice day. Bye-bye.